First, another logistics company has shut down operations abruptly, which has left drivers stranded with canceled gas cards. And our senior editor, Clarissa Hawes, is here to join us and give us the latest. Clarissa, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me on today.
So let's dig right into it, Clarissa. Sunset Logistics all of a sudden is no more. And of course, this is not a story that is necessarily strange to us, but we do have drivers that have been stranded. Their gas cards have been turned off. Tell us a little bit about what's going on.
Sure. In this case, we started hearing rumblings about, Sunset Logistics, like losing, or that they were hearing from drivers that they were being called back to the terminal, and then some, like their fuel cards, they didn't have enough fuel to make it back. And so when they tried to fuel up, they weren't working. So then the instructions were that they should make, they should deliver to the nearest Ryder dealership and go home. But the company wasn't offering funds to pay them to get home.
And Clarissa, when I first hear about this, of course, I think to a much larger scale a couple of years ago with Celadon, when so many were stranded and left with gas cards. We're looking at these drivers that are now being stranded most recently at Sunset. Are they en route to maybe an appointment? Are they carrying or hauling any goods? Do we have any details around that?
We did hear that, some were en route with a load, and while others were, kind of near their home base, so that they were, they were going to take the weekend off before they picked up their next loads, but that all loads delivered back to Michigan, like all of their major customers, from what I've heard from drivers, were in Michigan, but, they would deadhead from, I heard in one case that, he would deadhead across the country, which seems, that if he didn't have a backhaul, they would just bring him back, with empty miles. And so, there was some financial decisions there that, the drivers didn't quite understand that, but that, they were just following what the owners and, senior executives were instructing them to do.
So Clarissa, in your article, you talk about how the company had been struggling for a while, since the beginning of about March or so, which was right in this middle kind of time frame of this extended freight shutdown, to the point where in the article it says that the owner of Sunset was using hundreds of thousands of dollars of his own money to keep it afloat. So it seems like this was not necessarily a nefarious action. This wasn't necessarily something that was intentional, more of just a victim of circumstance to the market, right? Is that kind of the general understanding here? And obviously these drivers are struggling without their final paycheck, but is that kind of the consensus, is that they did a good job to try and keep us afloat for as long as they could? It's just a victim of circumstance?
There's been varying reports, even since that initial story came out, about funds, and in some cases, some of the owner-operators, their escrow accounts are supposed to be kept separate from the operating funds of the trucking company. And so that should have been in a separate account, not commingled with company finances. And so there's some question about where those funds are, because they should have been easily available for these these owner operators. And so far they haven't been able to access their money, that's usually for maintenance, like repairs and things like that involve their trucks. So, you're not surprised. It's, that you have the money in case something like this happens. And so, yeah, they're still wondering when and if they're going to get their escrows from the company.
And Clarissa, you also kind of mentioned some stats. Seems like they were running a pretty decent operation. Can you talk to us about some of the inspections that were done on their vehicles over the last few quarters here?
Sure. It looked like they, that they were under the national average and everything. The only question was that, they had 3 injury crashes and 15 towaways in the past 24 months. So that's always something to look at, and wondering about the shape of the company, the company's equipment, that was involved in this. The sad part of this is that some drivers had started the week of this shutdown. And so that's the interesting part is that they were hired, they had done their orientation, and were just, like brand new with their first load, and then something like this happened. So didn't have any communication with the company, or they were just, like the only communication was, hey, drop your truck here and, and find a ride home, kind of. And a lot of times when you're starting a job, you don't have the resources, in some cases, to get home. So there was kind of a few that were surprised with the excitement of starting a new job and then losing a job the same week.
Yeah, it's that sudden pull of the rug underneath their feet is difficult for sure. Any indication on if the company now goes into a bankruptcy filing, or if this is just a straight up closure, and what that means for them going forward?
We're still, sorting through that. I haven't checked this morning to see if they have filed, but, this family, the Gainey family, has an interesting history in trucking. I've covered them, like Buddy Gainey, his father, Harold Gainey, owned Gainey Transportation, Gainey Corporation. And they at one time had like 40 or 4,000 employees that, like when I was hearing from some of the older drivers that, in that case, it was kind of the same thing, that they were at the terminal and all of a sudden, it was shut down without any advance notice. And so in that case, they did file for bankruptcy. And, because of their line of credit, the bank called in their loan and they couldn't repay back, the money that was owed in that case. So, in this, there's been, there's a lot of rumors it's still at this point about what's going on with the company. But yeah, we should know more in the next few days. But again, company officials, other than the emails that were forwarded to email or to FreightWaves, we still don't have a clear picture from, or haven't heard from company executives about what their next steps are going to be.
Certainly an unfortunate story, but Clarissa, thanks so much for bringing us all the latest, and we'll be sure to follow up with you as this develops.
Okay, thanks for having me today.